Hi BookTube, it's Amy, and this is the Unread books video that I promised in my recent Friday reads. So, as you can probably tell from the boxes behind me, I will be moving in a couple of weeks, and so I've started the packing process. And at this point, I have only packed the books that I've read. So that comes out to about 7 of these small boxes here. But there are a lot of unread books that still need to be packed, and I thought I would take this moving opportunity to kind of go through them and take stock of what I have, what I haven't read, and what I should theoretically be reading in the near future since I own them. So I'm going to start with what I've stacked up here. So I've got this great copy of George Eliot's Middlemarch that I was really excited about when I bought it. And this is a copy that I picked up at the Book Vault in Endicott, New York about 4 years ago. Actually, probably more like 5 years ago now that I think about it. And this particular edition is from 1888. And I've got also Adam Bede and The Mill on the Floss in these editions, I believe. I have read The Mill on the Floss, but after all this time, I've left Middlemarch in this beautiful edition here unread. So that is, I guess, on my TBR pile. We can call this a TBR. I also have a copy of... Nope, I've read that. I was going to say I've got a copy of Frankenstein, but that's just a book that I bought a new edition of recently, but I've read Frankenstein a couple of times, so that doesn't count here. But I picked up this past weekend The Romantic Poets, which is a collection of everyone from Wordsworth to Coleridge to Shelley, and I bought this mainly for the Shelley because I read a book about Mary Shelley and Mary Wollstonecraft over the weekend, and it sort of spurred me to want to revisit some of the Romantic poets who I have to admit I've never really loved, but I've never been a fan of poetry to begin with. And, you know, reading that joint biography about Wollstonecraft and about Shelley made me think that perhaps coming to the poetry, understanding a little bit more of the time they were in and the lives they lived, perhaps I would enjoy Shelley and perhaps I would enjoy Byron more now that I have some context. So I've got that. And reaching back here, here's the one thing that I guess is sort of shameful, how long my copy of James Joyce's Ulysses has been sitting on this shelf without me having read it. I bought it last year and told myself I was going to dive into it immediately, and that never happened, and it sat there just where I left it when I bought it. So I should be reading that soon. Another book here that I bought, and although I said, you know, I'm excited to read this, that's the receipt, I'm excited to read this, I never really got more than a few pages in. Here's my makeshift bookmark. About a year and a half, 2 years ago, I was in a phase where I was using these little stickers to make my own tabs in the books I was reading, and I guess perhaps I intended to start doing that with this one. This is Hannah Ardent's The Human Condition, and someone here on BookTube recommended this to me. I'm going to take a stab at it and say that it was Miriam who recommended this to me, but I don't really remember anymore. Perhaps I'm just thinking of her because she is big on philosophy. But this is a work of philosophy that I bought telling myself I was going to explore this author, and I haven't done that yet. And then I've got, this is a book that I picked up for free. Where I did my master's degree, they would often have a cart of books outside the poli-sci main office, books that professors were discarding. And so this is called The Battle Over Bilingualism, the Manitoba Language Question, 1983 to 85 by Russell Doran. And I don't know much about this other than that has something to do with a case I'm very interested in. The back says, the battle over bilingualism in Manitoba began with a federally funded parking ticket. It ended with the province in turmoil, the government on the ropes, and the taxpayers confronted with a $20 million bill for the translation of old obsolete laws. And this, of course, links back to Manitoba's decision to, at a certain point, to stop translating laws into French and to have them only passed in English. And of course that violates the Constitution. And in the 80s, when that came to light and the Supreme Court said, no, you've got to go back and do this, suddenly they realized they had to repass and translate a lot of old legislation into French to make it all legal. And so I grabbed this thinking it would be interesting to learn more about that. So I've got that. This is another one from that cart. Canadian Feminism and the Law, the Women's Legal Education and Action Fund, and the Pursuit of Equality by Shireen Razak. Once again, don't really know much about this, but it is something that I may read. Maybe it's something I should just go ahead and pass on now that my studies are over. You know what? Yeah, I'm going to pass this on, so I'm going to throw that into a pile on the floor, and I may or may not add more to that pile. Here is a Value Village find, the novels of Simone de Beauvoir by Elizabeth Falaise, and I'm thinking this is a library discard, just based on the what appears to have been a sticker at some point on that spine. But, digital copy of a movie. These appear to be essays, and I had actually started reading this, but I never finished. Essays on Simone de Beauvoir's novels, and I think some of the thought processes and philosophy behind them. So that's something I want to read. And then I have Margaret Atwood's Wilderness Tips. This is a secondhand buy. Don't know anything about this one, really. I won't bother reading the flap for you because I've got a lot to get through. But this is one I picked up mainly because I wanted to read more Margaret Atwood, and there it was on the shelf, a Margaret Atwood novel. And that's probably not a very good reason to pick up a book, but that's what I did. Then I have one that someone commented on my Instagram photo from about 2.5 years ago, in the past couple weeks, asking me how Roxana by Daniel Defoe was, and I had to quite embarrassingly say I don't really know, I haven't read it yet. This is one that I bought when I was out in Vancouver, and I bought it at a used shop there mainly because the cover was beautiful. I am a sucker for a beautiful cover, especially when it's in a paperback like this. This is one I do want to read. I don't think I've actually read any Daniel Defoe, but, oh, here I am looking for the copyright date, but there isn't one. It just says, printed in the USA, distributed by Universal Publishing and Distributing Corporation, all rights reserved. All characters in this work are wholly imaginary, and any resemblance to persons living or dead is purely coincidental. This is a royal book, a Royal Giant Book number 24, and this is a series of printings that I am not familiar with. I also have here Friedrich Nietzsche's Twilight of the Idols and the Antichrist. Once again, a work of philosophy that I bought intending to read, and I never really did. And, so I bought this from the bookshelf in downtown Guelph, Ontario. So if you're from Guelph, you'll know exactly where this is. And now I'm remembering when I bought this. So it was the first Christmas when I went back to visit my parents after moving to Ottawa. And a friend of mine and his sister, who I now consider a friend, so two friends of mine, we went to Guelph to go to the Works, which is a great burger joint there. And then I saw the bookshelf, and I said, you know, let's stop off in here. I had been there several years before on a date, and so I had some memories of it, but I probably shouldn't have been buying books at that point because I was pretty much unemployed apart from my teaching assistantship position. But I guess it looks like I chose to spend $17 plus tax on Nietzsche's Twilight of the Idols and the Antichrist, which I should probably read at some point. And then this is one, oh, that's a weird bookmark. I'm going to trade that out. These appear to be like makeup removing pads. I'll use anything as a bookmark. Let's use the Justice League e-copy for a bookmark here. So this is a book that I've owned since before I moved to Ottawa, and I think I stuffed it in my suitcase on one of my trips back to visit my parents, because I know it was on my shelf there for the longest time. But this is Bertrand Russell's Why I Am Not a Christian, once again a work of philosophy. And it appears that at some point I got 50 pages in, but don't ask me what this is about. I have no idea. It looks like it's a series of essays. So chapter 2 is Has Religion Made Useful Contributions to Civilization? And chapter 3, What I Believe. So this is something that I'll probably read at some point, just because I do find the subject matter interesting, but I don't think it's anything I'm going to be diving into immediately. So there's that one. What else have I got here? So I got the novels of Balzac, Country Doctor, and Quest of the Absolute, which is a book that I believe I showed off in a book haul several weeks ago. It might even have been my video that I titled Searching for Hugo. When I was on the search for The Hunchback of Notre Dame, I came across some Balzac instead. Okay, so I've got Leias Angel by Anthony Trollope. I'd really like to read more Trollope. In fact, I don't think I've read any Trollope at all yet, despite having several of his books on my shelves. So the back here says that Leias Angel, Trollope's 18th tale, was published in 1881. It is the work of an old man suffering from writer's cramp, yet it is the brightest and freshest novel he ever wrote. On the death of their artist father, Alea and Lucy Dormer are farmed out to relations. Alea, and the more romantic of the two sisters, has a high ideal of the man she wishes to marry, but reality requires her to choose between the vulgar Captain Batsby, her callow cousin Tom Tringle, struggling with names here. As I said, I don't know much about this novel. And ugly Jonathan Stubbs. The wit and persistence of the latter win out finally, and he is transfigured into Leias Angel of Light. The novel is remarkable not only for its heroine, but also for a wealth of minor characters, among them a collection of fashionable South Kensington artists, a champion sponger, and one of the most sympathetic of Trollope's awkward young men. So I've long wanted to read some Trollope, and the last little while seeing Steve Donahue do some read-along type videos and talk about Trollope's novels have made me want to, pick up a Trollope novel, but I've yet to actually do that. Then I've got here on Tyranny, More Philosophy by Leo Strauss, who is a political philosopher. I studied some of his works in one of my master's classes. And I'm not sure if I'm going to like this one, but we'll see. And then I've got more Margaret Atwood. As I said at one point, I was just picking up any Margaret Atwood I saw because I wanted to read more of her. And so I have her novel Alias Grace here. I won't say much about that. If you don't know anything about this novel, you can easily find it all over BookTube and all over the internet. Then I've got William Faulkner's novel, The Sound and the Fury. I've never been able to get through any Faulkner, so he is a challenge for me that I would like to conquer at some point. I've got some more nonfiction here. This is Quebec the Revolutionary Age, 1760 to 1791 by Hilda Neatby. So this is a work of history. The back here says the struggle of the French in Canada from the surrender of Montreal in 1760 to the Constitutional Act in 1791 is authoritatively set forth with vivid descriptions of the colorful social and economic life of the times. Here are the historic roots of the factors involved in Quebec's present-day restlessness. So that sounds like quite an interesting one. And of course it will be tinged with the perspective of, 1966. when this was originally published. This reprinting is from 1977, but it will be, you know, Quebec history through the lens of the 1960s, which I think will be pretty interesting to have a look at. Then I've got John Galsworthy's The Forsyth Saga, another one that has been on my mental TBR list for ages, forever it seems. And I don't really know much about this one. It's just, you know, a famous title that I've heard. I know there's television adaptations, and I may have even seen, you know, a snippet of an adaptation at one point. But let's see. So it says, initially the narrative centers on Solmes Forsyth, a successful solicitor living in London with his beautiful wife Irene, a pillar of the late Victorian upper middle class, materially wealthy. His appears to be a golden existence, endowed with all the necessary possessions for a man of property, but beneath the very proper exterior lies a core of unhappiness and brutal relationships. And it talks about the disintegration of his marriage, feud within the family. So that sounds like an interesting one. I really should read more Victorian novels. Okay, so here we have Felix Holt by George Eliot. So I don't seem to have Adam Bede, which I think I mistakenly said earlier. I have Felix Holt, Middlemarch, and The Mill on the Floss in these editions. So this is also from 1888, and I like these end papers here. A little bit on the yellowed and fragile side, and the text is smaller than I would like, but you have to admit they look pretty on a shelf. So let me reach back here, and what do we have? So I've got Nan by Emile Zola, which I showed off in a book haul over a year ago and still haven't read. I've been wanting to read some more Zola, but for some reason I haven't picked up this one yet. And I've got Heidegger and the Quest for Truth, edited with an introduction by Manfred S. Frings. Once owned by someone named John A. Walter, shout out to this random John. Paid $7 for it at the KW Paperback Plus several years back. This is a 1968 printing. And my interest in Heidegger, oh, what do we have here? Oh, that's interesting. Someone showing off a correction here, what a line of the book should read. But as I was saying, my interest in Heidegger stems from my interest in Simone de Beauvoir and Sartre. And when I was reading at the Existentialist Cafe several years back, Heidegger is an author that is described as significantly influencing the existentialist movement in France. And so I wanted to read this to, you know, expand my knowledge of that time period and that train of thinking. As I continue to reach back here. So I have a couple of Virgo modern classics here. I have Rebecca West's Cousin Rosamund, which I guess is about two sisters who are celebrated pianists, and their happiness is diminished by their cousin's unfathomable marriage to a man they perceive as grotesque. So that sounds like an interesting one. I admit I'm not itching to read it right now. Actually, it borderline sounds boring. I'm not sure why I bought it, but as I bought it, I think I should give it a try. And then I have here Betty Miller's On the Side of the Angels, another Virgo modern classic. The back here says, Honor Carmichael and her two young children are uprooted to Linfield, where her husband Colin, a dapper small-town doctor, is stationed at the RAMC hospital. She is visited by her sister Claudia, whose fiancé Andrew waits to be invalided out of the army. Whilst Andrew dismisses himself as damaged goods, Colin becomes absorbed by the petty feuds and power games of the uniformed life, most particular with the arrival of Captain Harriet, a commando and the CO's current favorite. Apparently peripheral to his male pirouetting, Honor and Claudia are nevertheless deeply affected by this war, for its threat to notions of masculinity forces both women to reassess the roles they've always played. First published in 1945, this exploration of the crushing psychological effects of war is a sensitively and beautifully told story. So I'm not actually sure where I picked this one up, but it sure sounds interesting. So I think I'm going to leave it here for now. I still have more unread books on the shelf behind me on the bottom, but I think this is going to end up being a two-part video just so I don't make this too long and don't drag it out. I think it'll work better in two parts. So I'll see you in a little bit, in perhaps a day or two, with the second part of this. I'm going to call it Taking Stock of My Unread Books.